Welcome to the Paul Spradley Show, a show dedicated to real strategies from real people practicing real leadership in diverse and inclusive cultures. And now here's your host, CEO of the diversity training firm, the Care-Based Leadership Collaborative, Dr. Paul David Spradley.
You can't tell, but I'm actually wearing my new Mr. Rogers shoes. You know, the kind that look like Mr. Rogers shoes. In fact, many of you are listening, so you probably have no idea what I'm even wearing, which is also awesome because I could completely make it up. Welcome to the Paul Spradley Show. We are in season 2 of the Paul Spradley Show, where we are talking with senior leaders to tease out some of their practices around people and community. I'm pumped about my guest today. Kori Amos is an HR consultant in Pittsburgh, the past president of the Pittsburgh Human Resources Association, the media relations director of the Pennsylvania State Council for the Society of Human Resource Management. It's a lot of words. And the co-organizer of Disrupt HR Pittsburg. Additionally, she's addicted to enthusiasm and is a coffee enthusiast. Kori, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here. I'm just excited that anybody would untether me and just let me talk.
Well, you're untethered, so we could talk about whatever you'd like to talk about today, including, I had a funny situation happen last night where my daughter was making flatulent
noises?
Yeah, she was farting.
She was farting.
And it's funny.
And we were sitting here and we were saying that I was sitting in the chair and the chair made a noise. And I proceeded to make the point that if you can't laugh at a fart or a fart noise, I think your soul has died. You're taking yourself too seriously because it's funny. It's just funny.
So
it just is.
That man who doesn't like to, his soul has died.
His soul has died. If you can't objectively find potty humor funny, you have taken yourself to a place where you are too serious.
So speaking of serious, your name is Kori Amos.
Yes.
How many times a year?
Here we go.
I know.
Here it comes.
I'm just saying, do people try to be witty and say, hey, have you ever heard?
Have you ever heard? There's many similarities between myself. So Tori Amos.
Yeah.
And I'm Kori Amos. It's my husband's name, Amos. So whenever we were together, whenever we got engaged, of course, the first thing people are saying is just congratulations and all of those things. But very quickly thereafter, they make this connection that it's only one letter different. And I just say, yeah, I've heard of it. Yes, I get it. There's one letter difference and millions of dollars and Grammys and, recording contracts. So there are many differences between us. But the reddish hair, all of that stuff, I get it.
The personality.
Get
it. Here's the thing. I think it's hilarious when the person says, Kori Amos, like Tori, and then they think they're the first person in the world
to come up with that. But I don't want to take that away from them,
right? That's sweet.
They're
nice of you.
They're experiencing it for the first time, making that connection, but also what's happening to them is they are quickly drawing a connection between my name and something that they already know, so they're probably not going to forget me. Ever. They're going to be like, oh, that girl who, because it's kind of like Tori Amos. So whatever it takes, I make up mnemonic devices for people to remember their names or to remember certain things. So if that's the connection that they're making, they could come up with worse things.
They could, like noises.
Like fart noises.
So are you from the Pittsburgh area?
I am from the Pittsburgh area. So I grew up in Ingram, which is very close to where we are now, but most people don't know it. Most people would say Crafton. So the Crafton, Ingram area, just a few minutes outside of downtown Pittsburgh. That's where I grew up. My parents still live there, still live in the same house. And so I wasn't born here, but I was here basically from infancy.
That's kind of my story too. I was born in North Carolina. I can't claim North Carolina because I left when we were 3.
I can't. Very similar story where I was born in a place called Monroe, Michigan, which is very close to Detroit.
I know exactly where Monroe is.
Do you know where Monroe is? So a lot of people who know Monroe will call me a Fermi baby because the Fermi nuclear power plant is why my parents were there, because my dad at the time was a corrosion engineer, basically. So there are a lot of rules and regulations on the protective coatings that you can put on a nuclear power plant, if you could believe it. There are rules about how you can do things. So it was this huge project, so they were there for a length of time because of that project. So that's why they were there. So people who know that area, know that kind of mid-'80s time frame when I was born, they say, oh, you're a Fermi baby.
Yeah.
So I am a nuclear person.
Well, you've turned out fine.
I think so.
I think you're
We'll see, I guess.
a decent person,
It's
human being.
I'm okay. Don't give me too much credit.
Your dad was or is a pastor?
He is a pastor.
Okay.
So he is the pastor for a church called Calvary Chapel, Pittsburgh. There are Calvary Chapels all over the country, all over the world. Our church is very small, so my dad always had a full-time job, chemical engineer, and now he works in IT, so I don't know, figure that one out, but has always had a full-time job and the church. So my mom basically ran the day-to-day operations of the church because my dad had a full-time job, still does have a full-time job. So he does both. He's got 2 full-time jobs.
What was it like growing up as a pastor's kid?
Oh boy, people usually think that when you say that you're a preacher's kid or a PK, for those people who are preacher's kids, you know the term PK, people will automatically look at you and be like, oh, you were wild, because they think you were so, I don't know, it's constrained as a child that you ultimately went wild, which is just not my story. If anything, and I was just talking to somebody about this recently, where I was trying to diagnose, why do I always have 1,000 things on my plate? Why am I always, trying to find other ways to be involved or think? And I thought, well, that's how we grew up. We had school, of course, we had extracurricular activities and things like that. But when you are in the family of the leaders of a church, especially a small church, it really is a community engagement initiative, to put it in corporate kind of terms, where everything that needs to be done is being done with your hands. So making the coffee before the service starts, making sure all the chairs are put away, picking up all the papers off the floor, teaching the Sunday school when somebody can't be there. So it really does become something that is always part of your day-to-day, in addition to your job, your life, all of those things. So how it was growing up was just very normal to me.
So I just want to slow down because I think you said something that a lot of people might skip over, right? This idea of it became normal for you to make a community with people. So even you fit it into your life, even though you had other things, because that was just what you did, was this idea of being in community with people.
Right.
That's really interesting, because I think our natural tendency is to not, right? I guess to sort of operate in our own sort of mini communities, which is me, my 2 or 3 friends, my 3 or 4 family members, and that's it. Like, I don't really. So you were almost forced into this space to interact, engage, think about people differently.
To think about people differently, and then also to subscribe to and adhere to and really be convicted and believe in the principles of Christianity, which at its heart is about serving other people. And really, it's not about you, and understanding that there are people in need. One of the things that, especially a small church that's embedded in a community can do is really meet very practical needs of people who are within their congregation and who are within their community.
Right.
So it really also brings out this idea of service is just muscle memory almost, because that's just how it was. Now, you could reject those things for sure. You could resent those things, because it does, when you're 15 and there's a Saturday night service, that's not where you want to be.
Right.
Okay. So please don't walk away from this thinking that I was just like constantly this super pious, angelic thing.
Right.
No, not at all. There were times that I pretended to be sick because I didn't want to go to church. There were times that I resented the things that we had to do because I was a snotty teenager.
Yeah.
But at the same time, once you kind of get out of those habits and you just see that there are other people who have needs that you have the capability to fulfill or to contribute to or support in some way, it almost blesses and fulfills you more than that person. And I'm sure you know this way better than I do, and I'd be interested to hear your take, is that a lot of the times when you are feeling down or you're feeling overwhelmed or even depressed and things like that, there are two things that can really contribute to whatever the journey is on to kind of get out of that space. And one thing is like prayer and meditation. So, I know not everybody believes in the same things I do, but, prayer and thoughtful meditation. But the second thing is, how can you serve somebody else? It's almost counterintuitive. But at the same time, if you can find a way to use your hands and feet to serve somebody else who is probably in greater need than you are, the dopamine that gets into your brain and how that makes you feel to just say like, no, I have value and worth and I have the ability to give to another person is addicting.
Yeah.
It's addicting.
That's really interesting. And I listened to a podcast called Tim Ferriss Show.
Yeah.
And he interviews people that are high level. And all of these folks, he asked them, like, what are your morning routines? And so you're talking about this idea of prayer meditation, and you don't have to be a person of faith, but this idea of being thoughtful, the idea of caring and giving. Like all of the folks that he interviews, when he asks them about their routines, they all say, and I just had this conversation the other day with one of the folks that I'm mentoring. I said, like, they all wake up, they all have some physical activity of some sort, so whether it's jogging or walking or stretching, yoga, they all have some time where they're being thoughtful, mindful. They all have some time where they're being grateful. So this idea of being sort of connected to people is, for them, if they're not religious, is a time of being grateful. I'm expressing gratitude, either writing a letter, a thank you letter to someone, having thoughts that I'm grateful about my family. So it's this idea of connecting with people because we yearn for that, right?
We do. We yearn for that connection. I just was teaching at a women's retreat a couple of weeks ago. I was just teaching this idea of devotion or meditation and I just said, I'm a very logical person in a lot of ways. And so when I sit down and I need to get into that space, sometimes I need an action item list. I need to be like, okay, I'm going to do this, 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 this. So I kind of walked them through this very practical way to do a devotion where the first thing on the list is, and for me, I'm somebody I like to write things down. So I have this notebook, and what I was walking these women through is, what do I do? Okay, let me just share with you. And the first thing is, and you write it down, how I start this time, and it takes 15 minutes maybe, but the way that I start this time and I write down something that I'm grateful for, because I'm a high achiever, I'm very hard on myself. And so one of the things that you kind of have to begin with is this idea of like, there is goodness in my life. There are things that I'm super grateful for. Let me begin there, because it kind of, I always says, like, gets me into that like squishy place where I don't have so much crust on me. So I can just say, okay, let me begin with that, and then everything else can kind of cascade from there. Because instead of sitting down and being like, oh, this is going wrong and that's going wrong, and you go into these negative cascading thoughts, let me begin and just say, and there are times that it's hard for me to think of something. I mean, I'm a person who gets frustrated and annoyed with things just like anybody else, or has difficulty in their life. But there has to be, first of all, I'm sitting in a warm house, I'm drinking a cup of coffee, all of these very, very practical things. You could just say, it could be the other way, right? So just starting with that gratitude and then kind of cascading different things from there, because it will, and the act of writing it down, because it's not just, okay, I'm grateful for, I have a house, fine.
Right.
But no, actually thoughtfully, let's say like, and it could be that simple. I'm grateful that I have a home. Okay, and then you start to think, oh, there are people who don't. Okay, and it shifts your brain for a second so that you can get into that space to thoughtfully meditate on something.
Yeah. I kind of want to go down this road a little bit more.
I know.
I might have to have you back on this show because I'm like,
that.
man, this is really cool. But I want to talk about what you do professionally, because
Sure.
You're operating at a high level in the city. You're one of the most sought after consultants in the HR space, because you bring some things to the table. Listen, I'm gonna plug you at the end of the show.
Okay.
And at the end of this show, 1 million people are gonna actually. I just made
That's
that
a
number.
lot.
I made that number up.
1 million.
I'm not
Why don't we
even-
go with 100?
100 people will
100
find you on
people.
social media
That's
and
cool.
say, "Hey, can you?"
Hey, I need some. Yeah.
So talk about what you do in the HR space.
So in the HR space, right now, I've been in HR since 2007, I think. What year is this, 2019?
Well, this is 2019.
What
almost
century is
2020.
this? Okay, it's basically 2020. So I've been in HR for that long. I stumbled into the profession, and it just matched a lot of my natural abilities and tendencies, so it sucked me in and I got addicted. What I'm doing now is I have a handful of clients that I work with as a consultant in different capacities based on their needs, usually small businesses or startups or organizations who are really struggling in talent acquisition. That's a big space where people are struggling. And so I swoop in like a hero. No, I swoop in and I just say, okay, what are we looking at? What are our needs? What are we trying to accomplish here? Human resources is such a catch-all because it contains so many things. Mm-hmm. But I will say for the most part, the clients that I'm working with now, the biggest things that I feel that I support them in and help move them forward in are their talent acquisition strategies and their employee communications. Those are the big ones. But then, of course, people need help with finding a payroll vendor, but all of those things. But I would say the big nuggets, and I really feel like what's going to be game changers in the next 5 years is going to be how people position their talent acquisition strategies and their employee communications. That's my opinion. People can disagree with me, but that's what I think.
Why do you think that's a thing that's going to be big in the next 5 years?
Well, for one thing, the talent acquisition space, sorry to say, most people are getting it wrong, in my opinion. They treat candidates like numbers. They treat candidates very poorly, and it's really affecting their talent acquisition strategies. They don't have a talent acquisition strategy. What they have is a career site that they put open jobs up, and they do what I call post and pray. They post a job and then they pray that something comes through. Right. They don't have this proactive initiatives about creating community, and this is the term that I use. You have to create community and goodwill in your candidate space. So people don't do that because it's difficult and it's time consuming and you don't get immediate results. But if you play the long game with that, it can really set you apart as an organization. So that's one thing. Employee communications, again, I just think many organizations are not getting this right. They have this concept. This is something that I hear a lot. Well, our employees know that this. They know that this is the way to do this, or they know that this is the policy or procedure. Our employees know these things. Then you come to find out, you survey, you do focus groups, they have no idea what you're talking about. So it's kind of, I just watched this documentary on Tsar Nicholas, who was the Tsar who was overthrown, who was assassinated at the beginning of the First World War. I'm going to make a point here. I'm going to draw a connection here. But so much about this documentary was, at the time, the people in Russia, they wanted some sort of government. They wanted elected officials. This Tsar, he was out of touch. There were so many opportunities where he could have capitalized on, and he could have said, okay, let me hear from the people of my country, but he had this very traditional way of thinking. He became a Tsar at a very young age. Listen, Tsar Nicholas, you can look all of this stuff up. But what I took away from watching this documentary, which was fascinating, but was also, there was this leader of this enormous country, ridiculous wealth within the Romanov family. And he was so out of touch with the people he served. And the people ultimately revolted, overthrew him, and assassinated him and his entire family. So he was almost kind of too big to fail in a way, and yet look at what the outcome was because he was so out of touch. Now, I'm not comparing employers out there to Tsar Nicholas, but there's a huge thing to take away from that where he felt he knew this is what the people need, this is what they want, and it was so just completely opposed to what reality is. The way that we talk to and treat employees, you don't have to go very far down the LinkedIn comments to hear what people are thinking and feeling. And employers who get it right, who treat their employees well, who operate with transparency, they're going to get out in the front because we do not have enough people to fill all of the open positions that are out there in the market.
Literally.
So we
that's
literally,
something that happened, that's come up in Pittsburgh, where they talked about,
Yes.
because of the baby boomers leaving, in the inflection point study, we have 85,000 jobs that'll be vacant
Yes.
in 2025, by 2025.
Yes, and the work that the Allegheny Conference has done with that inflection point, I think a lot of people knew these things were coming, but this was just a real moment to say, if we don't do something about this, but what it's going to mean in the talent acquisition space and for organizations, in my opinion, it's already hyper competitive to acquire talent. What people want is meaningful work. They want some kind of work-life fit. It's not always going to be a balance. Balance really gives somebody the connotation that it's going to be equal, but it's really more about fit. There are times that family is going to rise to the top. There's sometimes that work is going to rise to the top. It's more about that fit. But the organizations who end up doing it well and intentionally well are going to be the organizations that, hey, they might not pay the highest salaries, but they will get the top talent. They just will. But people are only, even though we've known about this for so long, that
Right.
Have we really done something about it? Because oftentimes, and it's not to malign all of these organizations, but it's because there's so many other things out in front of these organizations that they need to do. They need to worry about their sales. They need to worry about their cash flow. They need to worry about all of these things. So this is the moment, I believe, where human resource professionals need to step out into the forefront and say, okay, we are going to be the leaders in our organizations to really advocate and fight for doing things differently. And that's one of the whole things around Disrupt HR. So there was this group of HR professionals who basically said, how we've dealt with talent, how we've dealt with our people practices in the past is not going to work moving forward. We need to blow it up in a way and get really disruptive and really say maybe sometimes some provocative things to shake ourselves into this moment of, you have to think differently. You cannot be defensive of your current practices because they're not going to work in 5 years. They're just not. And
is it because the population, so that I've heard people say that the next generation that's coming up are, they're different socially and emotionally, right?
Yeah.
So they connect differently.
Right.
Is part of this sort of going back to community and being great at doing people work, is that because of the population? You said it's going to be different in 5 years. Like, what's the catalyst
it's going to be
behind?
different. The biggest reason it's going to be different is just because of I don't particularly care for this phrase, but the war for talent is what a lot of people call it, is just not having enough people to fill all the positions
There's
that
less
we have.
babies being born. So
Guys,
it's just,
get to work.
right? Like,
So, but
that's a PSA for you married folks out there.
But so the actual numbers, we don't have the numbers. But also, what about your retention strategies?
Absolutely.
How do you bring people into your organization and actually bring them in,
Right.
and create that community with your employee population? So one of the reasons it's going to change is because of the shift in the age and the shift in the generations. I don't know. I'm one to believe that some of the things that millennials and Gen Z coming up, and even Gen X, which is a very small generation in comparison to baby boomers and millennials, but I really do think that they want the same things. They just maybe didn't ask for them.
They didn't know what they didn't know.
They didn't know what they didn't know, and even more than that, it's you kind of read the room.
Right.
You take the temperature and you say, this is how I'm going to be successful in this environment, and you adjust. So I think people just did what they had to do. They saw the landscape of working really hard, being a loyal employee, working 70 hours a week. That's what's going to get me. That's how I'm going to achieve success in this paradigm. But then people are coming along and, entitled millennials and all of that, and I'm an elder millennial to take,
You're a senior.
I forget the comedian's name, Eliza, I can't think of her name, but she coined it, an
Right.
elder millennial. But these millennials came in and they were like, hey, what do you mean? Like,
Right.
this should be fair. There should be, and then, it's tradition to hate the generation younger than you. So a lot of people just kind of really like threw dirt on a lot of things they were asking for. But I would venture to say the things that millennials were in their entitled way were asking for things that everybody wants: work-life balance, meaningful work,
Being treated fairly.
meaningful feedback
Right.
on a regular basis. There are entitled people in every generation, and sometimes the entitlement with the generation younger than you just comes because of their age. They're young. Of course they're entitled. It's part of being young. One of the things we're going to see with Gen Z coming up, though, and we're still learning about this Gen Z generation coming up, is you have to remember they were very young during the housing market crash. So how is that going to affect them? And one of the things that I've heard over and over again is just that they're going to be very fiscally conservative for that reason. So I don't know. Well, a lot of it remains to be seen, and there's a lot of good work being done on assessing some of the trends within that generation. But so the change in the next 5 years is going to be, first of all, technology, how technology is going to advance things, AI, the shifts in the workforce, and the fact that we don't have enough people. So how are you going to set yourself apart?
We have to wrap up. Can I have you back on the show?
I don't know. I'll have to think about it, but yes, you can. You have to play hard to get.
Right. No,
in a negotiation.
It was well negotiated.
You can't.
It was well negotiated.
But then I gave in immediately.
Well,
so
I thought for a second. At least
I for a moment
yeah,
there,
it was a
I
firm
instilled
maybe.
fear in you.
Where can people find you on social media?
So people can find me, I would say my number one social media channel that I like to use is LinkedIn. So
Okay.
Kori Amos, Kori-Amos, look me up. So that's the social media channel of choice that I use. I would also say look up Disrupt HR Pittsburg. We have Instagram, we have LinkedIn, we have Twitter, we have Facebook pages. But Disrupt HR Pittsburg is going to be an event that we're going to do twice a year. We just did our first one under a new group of co-organizers last week. The next one will be in spring 2020.
That's great. Well, I am grateful for you being on the show.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's like I
know.
achieved my goal so fast.
So quickly. Actually, we have time for 2 more quick questions. You are a coffee enthusiast?
I love coffee so much. And the other thing is, people who know me can tell how much coffee I've had, usually, because I'm already very like enthusiastic and sometimes a little bit too much in things, but it just really turns up the knob if I've had several cups of coffee and on top of that, if something exciting is happening, and I'll just say, listen, you're just gonna have to deal with me right now. I've had 2 cups of coffee. I've only had half a cup of coffee today.
Okay.
So
I'm dealing with
gauge
it.
that.
I'm dealing with it.
Gauge how this is. This is on half a cup of coffee.
Kori Amos, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Amos, am I saying your last name correctly?
Amos, like
Amos.
famous. I would say like famous Amos cookies.
Okay.
Think of the cookies.
Famous Kori Amos.
Famous. Let's get that trending if we
There
could.
go. Famous Kori Amos. Thank you for being on the show, and that's our time. Stop what you're doing right now and subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. Also, I'd like to meet with you for a free consultation on how together we can improve the culture in your workplace. You can email me or connect with me on social media at Dr. Paul Spradley to schedule your strategy session. Until next time, do me a favor and keep on caring.